stimuli. Simple, right? Okay, let's begin with the first concept, diversity in the living world. When we look around us, we see so many different types of living organisms, plants, animals, and even tiny microbes. This variety of living organisms is called biodiversity. And do you know, there are millions of species on Earth, about 1.7 to 1.8 million species have already been identified, and many more are still undiscovered. Now imagine so many organisms. How do we study them? We need a system to organize them. This is why classification becomes important. Classification helps us to identify organisms, give them proper scientific names, and understand their relationships. For example, we have different groups like bacteria, fungi, reptiles, and amphibians, birds, and mammals. All of these show how diverse life is. So, exploring this diversity is very important in biology because it helps us understand life better. And remember, all living organisms are aware of their surroundings and respond to stimuli. Let's move ahead and understand this in more detail. Okay, now let's move to a very important concept, taxonomy. So, what is taxonomy? Taxonomy is the science of classification of organisms. In simple words, it means naming, describing, and classifying organisms. Now you already know there are millions of organisms on Earth, about 1.7 to 1.8 million species have been identified, and many more are still unknown. So, without classification, it would be very difficult to study them. So, a scientist named Carl Linnaeus gave a proper system to name organisms. This system is called binomial nomenclature. Bi means two. So each organism has two-part name. Now there are some simple rules. Names are in Latin. First word is genus, starts with a capital letter. Second word, species, is written in small letters. For example, Panthera tigris, Rosa indica. Here Panthera and Rosa are genus and Tigris and Indica are species. Carl Linnaeus is known as the father of taxonomy. So, taxonomy helps us to identify, name, and classify organisms properly, which makes studying biology much easier. Okay, now let's understand how organisms are arranged in a proper order. This is called taxonomic hierarchy. To remember the order, we use a simple trick. King Philip came over for good soup. King Philip came over for good soup, which stands for kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. One more time. King Philip came over for good soup. This is the hierarchy from top to bottom, from broad category to most specific. Kingdom is the largest group and species is the smallest. Let's understand this with an example of tiger. Kingdom, Animalia, phylum, Chordata, class, Mammalia, order Carnivora, family Felidae, genus Panthera, and species Tigris. So scientific name becomes Panthera tigris. Now remember this very important point. Species is the basic unit of classification. What does species mean? A group of organisms that can interbreed and produce offsprings, and they are found universally. Different organisms like tiger, dolphin, and rose all follow this hierarchy. Only their classification levels change. So, taxonomic hierarchy helps us organize and understand living organisms in a structured way. Simple, right? Okay, now let's understand a modern concept, systematics. So, what is systematics? Systematics means classification along with evolutionary relationships. In simple words, it is not just grouping organisms but also understanding how they are related. You already know about taxonomy. Now, systematics goes one step ahead. It includes evolution also. It studies diversity as well as how organisms have evolved over time. This idea became clear after the work of Charles Darwin. He explained how organisms evolved and are connected. So, all organisms are connected like a tree. This is called the tree of life. It shows how different organisms are related through evolution. Now, one important term, phylogeny. It means evolution history of organisms. Who came from whom? So, what is the goal of systematics? One, to trace the linkage of organisms, and two, find evolutionary links between them. And remember, species is the basic unit of classification. It is a group of similar organisms that can interbreed. So, overall, all organisms are related through evolution. So, systematics helps us not only classify organisms but also understand their evolutionary relationships. Simple, right? Let's talk about tools for studying biodiversity. We call them taxonomic aids. First, the herbarium. These are collections of dried pressed plants we use for reference. Next, the museum. Preserved plants and animals, great for historical comparisons. Then, botanical gardens, living plant collections for research and conservation. After that, zoological parks, animals in nature like settings supporting conservation and education. And finally, we have keys, step by step guides that help us identify species. All of these tools work together to help us organize and understand the huge variety of life. Okay, so now let's quickly revise everything we learned in this chapter. First, we saw that there is a huge diversity of living organisms on Earth. Millions of species exist, and many are still undiscovered. So, to study this diversity, we need classification. It helps us to identify, name, and organize organisms. Then we study taxonomy, the science of naming, describing, and classifying organisms. And we also learned binomial nomenclature given by Carl Linnaeus. We also understood taxonomic hierarchy from kingdom to species, where species is the basic unit of classification. Then we study the characteristics of living organisms, growth, reproduction, metabolism, and consciousness. Now remember these key points. Growth is not a defining property. Reproduction is not a defining property. Consciousness is the hallmark of living. Metabolism is the defining property of life. Finally, we studied systematics, which includes classification along with evolutionary relationships. All organisms are connected through evolution. So, in this chapter, we understood what is life and how it is organized. If your basics are clear here, the rest of biology becomes much easier. Let's continue this journey in the next chapter.